Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from. My name is Alexis Vaughn. I'm the Director of Racial Equity Initiatives at Interfaith America, and I am delighted to welcome you to our conversation today on building thriving communities through faith-based community organizing. At Interfaith America, we believe that we can only really realize the true potential of American democracy when we see religious diversity and other forms of diversity as a foundational strength that we have that will enable us to sort of be our best selves and build our best communities. So today we're delighted to be joined by three esteemed panelists. We have Mark Crain, Stephen Harris, and Reverend Dr. Cassandra Gould with us today, who are part of our Black Interfaith Project and our Votive Sacred Project. I'll invite them to introduce themselves a little bit more in depth in a moment, but for now, a little bit of Zoom housekeeping. If you need captioning for this event, please do select the CC button at the bottom of your screen. You can then adjust the caption sizes by clicking the button and the subtitle settings that you need. We will be adding the speaker bios to the chat. So if you have your chat function open, we encourage you to follow along. We'll be dropping little nuggets in there as the conversation ensues. And also, as we go along, if you have questions for our panelists or anything that comes up for you, we encourage you to click on the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen and enter your question that way. We'll be monitoring that. And as time permits, we will get to as many questions as we can. After our conversation today, you will receive a link to the recording and a link to a brief feedback survey in the coming days. We really encourage you to complete that survey and then share the recording with your networks or anyone you know who would be interested in hearing this conversation but wasn't able to make it to be with us today. So with that, I will say welcome again, and let us begin by introducing our panelists. So if our panelists could come on screen, I will ask you to introduce yourself by just sharing your name, your title, and maybe your relationship with Interfaith America. And Reverend Gould, we will start with you.
Good morning, afternoon, depending on where you are. I am Reverend Dr. Cassandra Gould. I currently serve as the Senior Strategist at Faith in Action. I'm an ordained elder in the African Methodist Episcopal Church and serve with this wonderful organization on the Vote is Sacred Committee. Thank you.
Mark, why don't we go with you?
Sure. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I'm really glad to be here with you today. I'm honored to join Interfaith America for this program. My name is Mark Crain. I'm the Executive Director of Dream of Detroit. We're a community development organization on the west side of the city of Detroit. We combine organizing with development to revitalize our neighborhood and build a healthy community. And over the last year or so, I've been serving as a Black Interfaith Fellow and eager for today's conversations. Thank you.
Yeah.
Hello, everyone. Good to be here. My name is Stephen Harris. I currently serve as Senior Director of Academic Programs for the Center on Faith and Justice at Georgetown University, former pastor and faith-based public policy advocate, but presently serving at Georgetown, as well as a doctoral student at Harvard and a teaching fellow there as well. Really glad to be here.
So to kick us off, let's start with a little bit of framing. And Reverend Gould, I will ask you this. So Faith in Action, your organization, is one of the nation's leading faith-based community organizing networks. If you could, please describe sort of your prophetic model for organizing and why Faith in Action moves in that particular direction.
Yeah, thank you for that question, Alexis. Faith in Action will celebrate our 50th year of doing this, using this model of organizing, not just in the United States, but across the globe. We believe that faith led. Faith compelled organizing is the best way to address the material and spiritual crisis that our country is currently facing. We have proven that it is the best tool that we have to actually confront social and political systems that are designed to exclude. We also believe that people of that faith, all of our faith traditions across traditions, have something to say, particularly about every injustice that there is. And so we use this model of working alongside people of faith, and quite frankly, these days, people that don't proclaim a faith, but using congregations, again, in a multi-faith context, a multiracial context, using congregations as anchors to create teams of people in the community, people who are not just in proximity of economic oppression, not just in proximity of racist practices, anti-Black and other people of color policies and systems, but people that are really bearing the brunt of it, people who are often sitting in the blood, family members of those who have been victimized, whether it's by the state or random gun violence and many other forms of oppression. We believe that everyone has to be able to use their own voice to build the kind of power, to contest for the power that is at work in their communities. And so we continue to do this work 5 decades later across this country, so that in my own Christian language, all of God's children has a voice, has opportunity to belong, and can actually transform communities by speaking truth to power wherever that power might be.
Thank you, and congratulations on 50 years. That is a huge accomplishment. Mark, I want to transition to you. I know that you can only join us for the first part of our webinar today, but I also know that Dream of Detroit has been inspired by Faith in Action, the Inner City Muslim Action Network, and others who use this sort of prophetic model of community organizing. So I wanted to ask how you specifically connect your Muslim faith to your work as an organizer, and how that's been received in the city of Detroit.
Yeah, no, thank you. You know, when I started organizing as a young person right out of college, actually, a program with the Inner City Muslim Action Network in Chicago, and at the time it was, you know, the Interfaith Youth Corps, Interfaith America, was actually one of my first jobs. So doing civic engagement work in the southwest side of Chicago, doing a lot of work engaging the Muslim community. And I was actually a fairly new adherent to the faith of Islam at that time. And so landing at a place like IMAN, the Inner City Muslim Action Network, was really healthy for me, because it allowed me to bring a background in social justice work to this new faith community, and to combine these things in a really organic way, and to work with folks who saw you know, their practice of faith as really critically defined by their engagement with the environment around them and their service of the people around them. And more broadly speaking, in pursuit of justice. So it was very healthy for me, and it sort of has animated the rest of my career. So I spent the last decade or so working in the progressive movement, but working on really bread and butter things like access to healthcare. Like, how do we get people healthy? Like taking down, you know, Confederate monuments, like these symbols of racism and oppression that still haunt us. You know, things that I think most of us can align around. When it comes to Dream of Detroit's work, we were absolutely inspired by places like IMAN and Faith in Action. Actually, one of our first coalitions that we joined here in Detroit was with the local Faith in Action affiliate, Force Detroit, faithfully organizing resources for community empowerment. And we absolutely love working with them around, resident-led solutions to community violence, and really being on the ground with the groups that were working neighborhood to neighborhood to solve this issue. And as Reverend Gould said, I mean, for us, you know, that early coalition with Force, it wasn't just groups that, you know, were faith-based, but they were, you know, framing these problems in a moral light in a way that called to these groups, even if they didn't, claim to be faith-based. For Dreams Work, we've always said that we're faith-inspired, and that is because, we're not like an extension of a local mosque or masjid necessarily. We have partnerships with several different masajid or mosques in this area. But, our work is Muslim-led, and we're proud of that. And it's broadly a service of everyone in our neighborhood. And at another level in our whole city when you talk about our organizing work. But it is both our intention to motivate the Muslim community to care about racial and economic justice in Detroit's neighborhoods, and to be of service to everyone living in our impact turf when it comes to providing affordable housing, when it comes to helping make sure that the neighborhood is so safe and welcoming, when it comes to making sure that folks have, food access. Some of our work, we often refer back to a saying of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, where he said that the rights of the child are these things. And he mentioned housing to cover their head, clothing to cover their nakedness, and food and water. And so for us, this is a really sort of foundational articulation of three important human rights, directly from the mouth of the prophet of our faith tradition. And so housing, clothing, and food and water, basically. And so the housing piece is a particular focus of ours. We renovate homes in a neighborhood that had otherwise been written off by urban planners. We're working to bring economic development to this neighborhood as well. And we're working to keep people in their homes. And that's a big part of our organizing work right now with a group called the Coalition for Property Tax Justice. And you can learn more about our coalition's work at illegalforeclosures.org. But the short of it is that, Detroiters have been overtaxed by more than $600 million in the last decade. When we talk about property taxes, 100,000 homes in the city of Detroit, 1 in 4 homes went into property tax foreclosure between 2011 and 2016, roughly. What that means is tens of thousands of people, tens of thousands of families lost their home, lost grandma's house, lost their inheritance, lost the thing that they thought was stable, that they owned outright. They lost it after being overassessed by the city, and then had it taken away by the county, that the county could balance their books by selling it to speculators in a lot of cases. So for us, one of the things that drew us to this coalition's work was that, the conveners of the coalition were framing this as a moral issue. I mean, this was robbery. This was state-led robbery, basically. Folks, again, being overtaxed and then having their property taken away from them. And then on top of that, I mean, this was an attack on people's dignity. I mean, so we found out that so many people dealt with this issue in isolation, didn't realize that right around the corner, another person was dealing with this exact same issue, thinking that they own this property outright, having it taken away from them after being overtaxed, losing, the family heirloom, having to own up to their brothers and sisters and their cousins about how they lost grandma's house, right? And so we had to bring folks together to understand that this didn't just happen to you in isolation. You're not solely responsible for this. This is a moral atrocity, and we collectively are going to work to get justice for you. And so for us, that coalition has looked like working with local churches, working with the local Jews for Justice chapter, working with other Muslims in the community organizing space in Southeast Michigan. And actually, we're convened by a sister who was a member at Trinity in Chicago, who really brought fire to this work when she showed up to Detroit with this research. She's a professor and a lawyer, and has driven a lot of this work for us. So, for us, it is, we can do our community development work and turn to our Muslim community for a lot of the support behind that. And we can tap into, these sayings from our prophetic tradition. And we can encourage folks to look at the history of Muslims building physical community in this country, Black Muslims especially. But to really be impactful at a citywide level, to really serve everyone, we can't do it without being in interfaith partnerships. We can't do it without realizing that, we're just one piece of this rather large puzzle that we have to assemble to solve this issue. And so being in good relationship with the local churches, being in good relationship with the local Christian-based organizing tables, this is all essential work to what we're trying to do.
Thank you for that. I mean, I think it's a great sort of segue into the question I want to let Stephen sort of begin with, but really invite all of you to sort of share. And this question has been reiterated by a lot of our viewers today, and also folks as they registered. But it seems like, you know, people of faith who are drawn to this work, or people who are drawn to organizing in general, sort of understand the basic premise that working in coalitions, diverse groups who are working toward the same goal, working together is a good thing. Strategically, it's easier, it helps us make a bigger impact, we get it. But the reality is, it's really hard to actually achieve and sustain genuine sort of like interfaith or multi-faith, multi-ethnic, multiracial coalitions over a long time. You know, there are folks who have reminded us, like I said, some of our participants today, that in the immediate aftermath of a lot of public events, the murder of George Floyd, you know, other things, like there is an immediate response. Everybody wants to do something. And a lot of times they do, but the relationships don't last. It's not, it's difficult to build sort of a sustainable movement that involves multiple faiths, multiple sort of backgrounds towards a certain goal over time. And so, Stephen, I want to sort of like begin with you, if you've sort of seen that in your work with congregations, and how do you experience that? What do you do? Sort of, how do you respond?
Yeah, that's a good question. And again, thank you to other panelists. Really great work that I obviously agree with all that has been said. It is something that folks do recognize. And part of the challenge is, as I work in both kind of academic spaces and then in congregational communities, folks who are kind of singularly focused on the devotional aspect of their own faith traditions and serving their particular communities. One of the things that I think distinguishes this discussion, the discussion between the academic context and that community congregational space, is that the language of interreligious engagement and interreligious dialogue, interreligious existence, is really more immediately recognizable and apparent, oftentimes in academic spaces, right? It is in many ways like a construct of study, right? And so the idea that even if I exist in my own faith tradition, it is incumbent upon me to be religiously literate about the plurality that exists around me, to be thinking in ways in which I might draw connections of common concern from other faith traditions. That kind of discourse, right, is more immediately available in kind of academic context, where you're kind of studying religion and thinking more broadly about religious traditions. Part of the challenge is for faith communities, as they are going about their daily and weekly works, whatever those may be, who, as you mentioned, have the desire and recognize not just the appropriateness, but the benefit of that kind of collaboration. They need a kind of structuring entity to come alongside them and help them figure out how to sustain that relational work, right? That's one thing. And I want to mention several things. So my interaction with Faith in Action used to be called PICO. I'm familiar with the PICO network. When I was in Kentucky, we worked with Direct Action Research Training Network, or DART, that really came in and trained communities on how to actually structure a community organization, what kind of time investment is going to be required, what are the kind of principles and key elements that define that work. But then also I want to say, you know, we had an event, the Center on Faith and Justice had an event yesterday commemorating the 60th year of King's letter from Birmingham jail. And so we kind of exegeted that letter. Bishop Vashti McKenzie and Reverend Dr. Otis Moss and Reverend Jim Wallace were talking about the elements of that text. You know, King talked about this garment of destiny that we are all a part of, right? There is a kind of singularity of understanding and commonality that I think really does knit people's hearts together. And the challenge I'm often posing to faith communities across faith traditions is, even as you are deeply invested, right, convictionally, communally, relationally in the work of your faith community, what does it mean to think broadly about our fundamental human connection to other individuals that exist around us? That connection, and this is kind of pointedly what I want to say, cannot be merely transactional, right? cannot merely orient around a moment of trauma, right, or an event or a moment of initiative. But that tetheredness, right, needs to be rooted in something deeper, right, that is deeply invested, is relational, right? Even as I'm committed to my own faith tradition, right? I'm always commending the fact that we can do both and, right? You can be deeply invested in your faith tradition, deeply invested in the convictions and the tenets of your religious traditions, and also still understand, speaking from the Christian tradition in particular, but I think this is a commonality amongst faith traditions, that in our humanness, we all share something. We call it the image of God, right? This fundamental aspect of our humanity that is divine, that connects us all. That ought tether me beyond just the moment, beyond just the event, right? So that the relational aspect of that is important, so that when I come in contact with my brother or sister in another community or another tradition, it's not me being updated about the recent trauma that you've experienced. I know it because I'm in a relationship with you, right? Oftentimes it's getting back together. It's like, okay, so what happened to y'all over the past 6 months? Well, here's what happened to us over the past 6 months, right? That doesn't speak to a kind of ongoing investment in each other's lives. And I think that's what we need to try to promote and commend.
Thank you, Stephen, for that. Others?
Just real briefly on that point about just our basic, shared humanity, and the image of God language is, resonates with me. I come from a Christian background. In the Islamic tradition, we talk about how, God animated, Adam with his own breath, right? And then we all share that. I had an incident when I was a younger Muslim. One of our founding imams at the mosque that I attend here in Detroit, the Muslim Center of Detroit, passed away last month. Imam Abdullah Lameen, may God have mercy on him. Really incredible brother, and he was one of those people who, the size and the diversity of his funeral really spoke to his own life's work, and he did a lot of interfaith work. And so we had different pastors speaking and rabbis and so forth. And I remember moving to this community 10 years ago, and being at the masjid one day, and I knew he did a bunch of interfaith work, and he had some meeting coming up, and he was on the verge of asking me to attend this meeting for him. I could tell it was coming. And I was like a fairly young Muslim, a new adherent. You have a certain fervor when you first convert to a faith tradition, accept a faith tradition. And so I told him, I said, "Imam, I don't do interfaith." And he looked at me and he said, "Well, you're a convert, right?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "You got aunties?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "You got uncles?" I said, "Yeah." "You got cousins?" He said, "Yeah, you do interfaith." I said, I said, okay, so he put me, right in my place, because yeah, I do interfaith at every family dinner, you know what I mean? Every holiday. I mean, we can't escape, this humanity and these basic experiences, and just learning how to be amongst each other. And that was a few years prior to making interfaith engagement a real deliberate part of our organizing work, but it was also just a healthy reminder and wake-up call. One of the projects that I hope to expose more folks in our Detroit community to is the research from Dr. Camila Rashad, another one of our Black Interfaith Fellows, around Islamophobia and how that shows up particularly in Black Christian communities, and what we as Black folks of all backgrounds have to learn from that. And so I'm really, we're kind of opening a conversation right now about having that presentation brought to Detroit. It's really interesting to me.
Thank you, Mark. Your comments remind me, I do work in Ghana with Faith in Action, and I'm going to put a shameless plug for an op-ed that I wrote about that work. It talks about it as a model. I think I only put it to host and panelists, but you can put it in the broader chat, Alexis, please. But it talks about the learnings that we've had from models in Ghana. I was sitting in a mosque, and the Ahmadiyya of this particular Muslim sect said to us that we asked them why MultiFaith Work was easy for them, because they described it as easy, which is kind of the antithesis of what I'm seeing in the chat and how we often experience it beyond the academy when we're thinking about it, because it should work. he said, it's easy for us, and we didn't have to think about if we would be in long, because we understood that we were talking about our aunties and our uncles and our brothers and our sisters. And when we look at the whole of humanity as if we are one family, it makes it a lot easier. Unfortunately, what we have to grapple with in these yet to be United States of America is the fact that the systems are not broken. They're actually working the way in which they were designed to work. They were designed so that segregation was the order of the day. Whether it's religious segregation or racial segregation, it still works. Dr. King also said in the 1950s in one of the speeches that amongst Christians, 11 a.m. on Sunday was the most segregated hour. Really that indication that even within one religious tradition, we are still siloed by race, by ethnicity, and etc. I spent most of my life in St. Louis, home of a suburb that most people got familiar with 9 years ago called Ferguson. And in the streets of Ferguson, I really started to analyze like how people of faith respond. And yes, we were all out there together. Now, for a small sample of us, there was some relationship across traditions. Since that time, I've been called to many places, particularly where Black blood has been spilled, most recently in Buffalo. And one of the things that I have noticed in most communities is that we might all be across faith traditions, geographically in proximity of each other, in our houses of faith. When a tragedy occurs, we are in physical proximity of each other, mourning together, speaking truth to power. But the reality is that we are not in actual relationship broadly enough with each other. Proximity puts us together in physical spaces, but relationship knits us together in the fabric of our lives. And so if we really work on the relationship aspect, which is what we try to do through our work at Faith in Action, we teach relational organizing. It's not just that it's organizing led by people that proclaim a particular faith, but we teach people in communities, like, who do you know? Who do you love? Who are you concerned about? What is keeping you up at night about those that you love? You start with the group of people that you love, the people that you care about, and you organize with them. If we're able to, and we're hopeful, we just 2 days ago launched a MultiFaith solidarity cohort that represents I think at least four faith tradition, multiracial, gender equitable, and all of those things that we try to model. But we're hopeful that in just one cohort at a time, one city at a time, that we are able to actually dismantle some of the walls that systems have erected to keep us siloed. It's an intentionality. The People's Institute would say it's an arrangement. And the sad part is, even as people of faith, we have actually cooperated with the arrangement. And so it's going to take more than showing up in the aftermath of tragedy and being at the same vigil, but not really knowing the names and the lives of the people that you're at vigil with. It's going to take being in the kind of relationship that we are able to co-create and conspire on creating the kind of community with the kind of systems and structures that we all deserve and we all believe in, and holding people accountable. And so when we really start to do that kind of relational work, we'll actually start to see some actual transformation beyond, as my Stephen said, and we've worked in some of these coalitions that have not always been easy, but there are things that we've agreed upon. It's going to take that kind of deep relationship so that when something happens, it's not that, oh my God, it happened. I'm not Black, I'm the Jewish person. Oh God, Black people were mastered in Buffalo. It is my siblings. Look at what has happened to my siblings, and it demands my presence because it has happened to me. And so that is the aspiration of multi-faith organizing as we know it at Faith in Action, and even in the coalitions that are represented on the screen.
Yeah, I thank all of you for just this rich conversation. We've had many thanks in the chat. I want to, really reemphasize and thank you, Stephen, for sort of framing just interfaith cooperation and interreligious engagement really as academic pursuits, right? These are categories that are discussed as intellectual concepts in the academy, but as Mark pointed out, and really all of you on this call, and what we really created the Black Interfaith Project to do is really reiterate that in the Black community, interfaith is an embodied experience. It's not just this intellectual concept out there, it's who we are. We are a diasporic people. Our families, our communities just exist in multiple identities. That's how it's always been, and that's how we understand that. So, but that's not how everybody understands it. So my question to all of you is, what is the responsibility of an organizer, but also like as a faith leader, whether you define that as a clergy person or not, but what are the responsibility to the public, to the community, to do some of that interpretation? So, if congregations are thinking about interfaith work just strategically as almost like a series of, and some people think of community organizing that way, it's just like a series of transactions or something that put us in the direction of progress. But what is our responsibility to translate some of this into the more relational piece, even the general understanding that some of the language we're using doesn't track with everyone, What is our responsibility there to sort of connect some of those dots as organizers and as faith leaders?
I'll start and I'll let my panelists back clean up. This is a really important question. One of the things I found myself doing often is trying to put communities at ease who are evidencing kind of smoldering anxieties about the fact that they have particular beliefs, right? Then one of the things that I'm always encouraging organizers to do who are trying to commend themselves to different communities is to show themselves literate in ways that suggest, I'm not here to suggest that you need to change your beliefs in order to come do this work. I actually think that one of the beautiful things and the powerful things about this work is when communities show up and say, yeah, there's a lot that we don't agree on about God, about all this other stuff, but we all collectively agree that affordable housing is a crisis in our community. And we've come together to say that and to work on that, right? So part of the work that I've done, and I've seen just as I've tried to talk to community leaders, congregational leaders, and say, no, this isn't about me suggesting that your particular theological beliefs and tenets and convictions need to somehow be altered in order to come to this table. But it is to suggest, to your point, a recognition that everyone at this table is not going to be where you are and align where you are, and that's okay, right? That's perfectly fine. In many ways, the existence of that table and my inviting of you to it, and me wanting you to see the benefit of being at it, is in many ways an aspirational demonstration of what we've all said should be possible here, right? And so that's been some of the beginning works that I found. At first, I didn't think that work needed to be done, but just in having some of those conversations, what does it mean for different theological worldviews, different theological views and visions? What does it mean for these individuals to come together and work on a project, right? Here's what it means and here's what it doesn't mean. As a way, again, to put communities at ease and understanding that there's an importance to this work and you're bringing your whole self to this work, certainly, but understanding what that table is about and the good work that can be done there. I've literally had to start there with many communities, not all communities, but certainly with many communities.
Oh, go ahead, Mark.
Please, Cassandra. Well, you know, I was just saying, I mean, both of you have really have brought to mind one woman in particular, who's a longtime organizer in Detroit, water warrior here. Her name was Mama Lila Cabell. And Mama Lila often talked about coming into community as one of the phrases that I really remember taking from her. And just this concept of coming in with a certain level of humility, right? And this goes to any community you might be stepping into, a new block where you're organizing, a congregation you want to work with, et cetera. And, you know, to Stephen's point, you know, when I wanted to meet with Pastor Blake at the local, you know, AME church about how we could work together more, and he says, you know what, you know, we're doing a prayer hour on Wednesday, come meet me at such and such time. You know, sometimes it's going to mean sitting there comfortably in the pew while the congregation finishes their prayer hour until the pastor is available to speak, not feeling like, oh, this isn't the right space for me, or oh, I left this how many years ago, or oh, I don't, you know, like there's a certain level of respect for the traditions and the people that you're trying to do work with, and it doesn't, you know, denigrate or it doesn't lessen the particularities of your own experience or commitments or anything like that. Another quote that Mama Lila would say that that Cassandra brought to mind was she would say that, you know, relationships are built at the speed of trust, and that movements are built at the speed of relationship. And so, you know, when we talk about what is it, what do we need to do as organizers or folks who, you know, are faith leaders, I think part of it is modeling that relationship building, you know, doing it authentically, but letting it be seen by your congregation that this is happening. You know, I always remember in my early days at Eman, the really sincere friendships between Rabbi Fournier and Father Tony and our director, Brother Rami Nashashivi, and the local imam. And you know, how when those crisis moments arose in any of our faith communities and it had like a public, you know, component to it, if you will, that those leaders were able to come together immediately because that relationship existed and it was there authentically, and they could bring their people with them. So part of it is being committed to that relationship building on a personal level, and you know, and then doing the work to bring our folks, you know, together. So one of the little things that we want to do this year, you know, is just to do a shared, you know, Thanksgiving dinner with the local AME church and the local masjid or mosque. And just getting the folks who attend both of these, you know, the lay people who attend both of these institutions, just to sit down and share meals together, because we know the type of magic that happens when folks are just sitting and eating and being in good company. So yeah, just those points about how we show up in community and doing it with a certain humility, but also that emphasis on relationship building.
Thank you, Mark. Yes, the relationship is what matters there. Stephen is reminding me of some work that I've done as a national partner with an organization that works on predatory lending. And many of us at that table are theologically opposed. However, we do agree that no one should suffer or be victimized by financial predation. And so one of the keys is, I think too often we have these kind of kumbaya models that, you know, we have more in common. So certainly we have our humanity in common. But oftentimes there are things that are vastly different, and it's okay. And so being able to agree that we're not going to dilute differences or, you know, engage in some model of subjugation of differences, trying to recreate or model what is supposed to be hegemonic kind of experience is also helpful. Like, yes, we have differences. Let's embrace those differences. Let's learn from those differences. But it also matters being culturally competent. When we are in relationship with each other, we start to learn the language. I remember as a senior pastor in Missouri, and putting out organizers from an organization that I would later end up being the executive director of. But I literally asked them to leave my church because they came using language and etc. that was actually offensive to the 150 Black pastors that I had assembled in the room. And so, because they had no relationship, they saw an opportunity. And so that speaks to the transactional nature of organizing versus the reality of trying to have transformative experiences. When we allow ourselves the time to develop those relationships, which again, hard to do in crisis, right? When 10 people are dead in the grocery store, we don't have time to show up and try to get acquainted. The real work of organizing happens long before there is a crisis, so that we are already acquainted, so that we can move together and be able to show up more powerfully. And so it requires a commitment. I was rushing to this call from a call with my Ghanaian counterparts and colleagues, and a screen full of Muslim, Catholic, and Protestant men and women of faith. And they were sharing their listening projects and their intentionality that we will not go out in the community unless there's someone that represents each faith tradition, and how they're learning together and what they're doing together outside of the project so that they might even get to know each other better. And it is that kind of work, that kind of intentionality that it requires of all of us, putting in that kind of time, looking across difference and being able to say, your humanity requires that I get to know you and you get to know me. I speak the language, or at least understand. It's hard to translate that which we are not actually engaging in, that which we're not familiar with.
So we have a couple of questions from folks about how you all make decisions in your work. So I think, Cassandra, you just touched on some of it. Like, there's a question about how do you balance the urgency of now, like when so many traumas are happening, like multiple school shootings, multiple national crises that need a response, with the much longer, more involved work of relationship building. Sort of, how do you make decisions on how you prioritize those things? And I'll just tie it into another question about how the work that you all are doing and faith-based or faith-inspired organizing more generally is doing to sort of shift the narrative. So sort of the dominant narrative in the media about sort of religion's involvement in public life is pretty much a negative one. This is mostly, I think, sort of informed by like white nationalism, Christian nationalism. But there are, as we know, like whatever story is out there, there's always another story, right? There's other things going on, like you all in your work. But how do you make decisions about what your relationship, sort of the media and the public square, will be, such that sort of the nation knows there's a different narrative of what faith in the public square sort of looks like?
I'll start with that. I was just came back from Buffalo this weekend at a conference about white supremacy and white Christian nationalism. And one of the things that I continue to share with faith leaders during trainings and etc. is that we need to reclaim the microphone, that we are the narrators of America, right? Whatever happens, whatever you say, you mess up this weekend, somebody's going to come back and hear you again, right? And so we really need to not abdicate all of the airwaves to those who might be speaking a different language around what faith is and what faith does. We really need to contend for the narration of what's really going on. I also, you asked the question, you kind of asked like 3 or 4 questions there, Alexis, but one of the questions around how do you prioritize, and I realize oftentimes this work as a pastor in the public square is often seen as only being a prophet, right? You're only speaking truth to power, confronting all the powers to be. And that's true, but you also have to understand that there are times, Buffalo being one, the anniversary is coming up, so it's really on my mind, is that when I got the call to come to Buffalo, I knew that I was going to be there in my priestly role. I was going there to comfort, to help, to walk alongside, to engage in the ministry of presence with those families. And some of that work is continued because families call me often because of that presence. And so it's actually using discernment, knowing when you're called to do what. It's also understanding that there's enough pain, sadly, in our communities that we are not all called to do the same thing at the same time. We don't have to have an oppression Olympics and kind of fight over turf, but we actually have to really own what our own call is and what we're called to do in a particular time. For me, as a Black woman in America, whenever when there's tragedy and trauma in our community that particularly involves Black lives becoming Black bodies, that becomes an immediate priority. And I'm doing the daily work in between the many traumas. And I can't respond to every trauma. I can't be everywhere at the same time. Most often for me, it is because the invitation has come, just come help us, or there's this nudging using Christian language in the spirit that says, go, you cannot not show up for this. But it's doing the daily work in between those traumas, those tragic events, of building the kind of relationship, and in my role at Faith in Action, equipping faith leaders, often at grass top levels, to do the kind of work that they can be in relationship prior to the next tragedy.
Yeah, I mean, it brings to mind the phrase, sometimes you have to go slow to go fast, and if you haven't done the slow labor beforehand, then in that crisis moment, you won't be able to go fast in any sort of effective way. One of the differences between, organizing and mobilizing is that the organizing work really is about, as Reverend Gould has said repeatedly, the relationships. It's more proactive, and it's more about the leadership of the folks who you're organizing with and the communities you're in, and it's about them determining what the issues are. Whereas, mobilizing, and there's of course a place for it in our social justice spaces, but mobilizing is really reactive. It's about capturing a moment. It's about responding to those crises when people are primed for a response and sort of taking advantage of the natural energy that's out there. And these things, go hand in hand, and they're each going to be a part of the strategy, the overall strategy that you're building. They're going to have their place, but they're 2 different things, and you can't let your organizing work be constantly derailed by every crisis that comes up. It just isn't how you do effective, organizing. So going slow to go fast.
Very quickly, I would add, because I certainly agree, the boundaries, whatever strategy you set out, the boundaries between these things will be porous, but it's good to have at least something in place that at least is keeping you accountable. You can't do everything, and one of the things I always give attention to when I'm talking about this work is not merely the externality of the work that we're involved in, but let's keep track of how we're doing in terms of our own interiority, right? Who are you becoming and who are you being as you do the work, right? Because that's important. And so making sure that people have and communities have, a sense of, okay, I can't do everything. What are going to be the measures and the metrics by which we as a community hold ourselves accountable? Organization I was with, you can adopt different things, but there were certain issues based off of the community I was with and the kinds of resources that we knew that we had, right? All of these things, right? Like, so what can I do? What can I do? What can't I do? These are the issues that we want to lead in, or that we want to play a leadership part in because of how we're resourced, because of where we are, because of maybe our proximity, et cetera. There are other issues that we want to be actively participating in, right? But because of how we're resourced and perhaps some of the things that we are focused on, we don't mind yielding leadership of this particular issue and area to someone else. We want to be actively engaged. There are other issues that we're monitoring, right? We're keeping an eye on. We want to stay abreast of what's happening. That monitoring issue may bump up to a participating or a leading issue, but it's a way in which I at least structure my sense of engagement. Again, not perfect by any means, but you got to have some sense of, okay, here is what we feel like we're called to in this season, and here is how we want to kind of triage our engagement. Very briefly, you said something about narrative and I think media. Well, this is always the frustrating thing, right? Like, I'm from Chicago. That teen takeover event made international news, right? What didn't make international news was the responses and how communities mobilized to address that, right? A pastor friend of mine, Charlie Dates, arranged to kind of walk through the city amongst faith leaders, right? That didn't make international news, right? In one sense, right, like there's a frustration with that, and there's a sense in which, okay, I can't address that. There's a predominating narrative about something that I can't immediately affect. To the other point, and I think Reverend Cassandra said this, right? Like, there is a sense in which, and this is where you have to be, I think, careful, because I think we'd all agree we don't do the work that we do for the optics, but there is a sense in which we do want to draw attention to what's happening, because we know that attention comes with particular access to particular resources and a particular response, right? Particularly when we talk about power dynamics and trying to shift these things. So there's an appropriate role for that. And we want to, as best we can, make sure that we are actively highlighting the work that we're doing so as to make sure that other narratives, other optics don't monopolize, right, the views of what faith and public life can do. Because I think we're all trying to commend the more positive role of faith in public life, because it has that role, it has that power, that ability. So there's a nuance there. There's the frustration of certain things that captivate the national imagination, but there are particular things that we can do in our communities as we try to give visibility to this work. Not merely for optics' sakes, but for the good of the people and the communities that we're invested in.
Yeah, I really thank you for that. I did see the pastors organizing on one news outlet.
There we go.
So we're, just making progress, But I just want to say, it's sort of like as we wrap up and as we close, to thank you all for this conversation, but also just for pointing out the nuances of this conversation and how many threads there are. I think so many of the folks who are joining us today who are interested in this work are sort of experiencing these challenges and opportunities at the same time, and really appreciate the framing that you all have given to this conversation. So as our sort of final word, what we like to do at Interfaith America, we believe in sort of connecting, equipping, and inspiring people to build what they want to see in the world, right? So with that, I want to invite you all to just really briefly mention sort of what gives you hope in this moment? Sort of what keeps you engaged in this work? And whoever wants to start can start.
You know, I feel like I stumbled through this question on another webinar recently. Actually, I should have a better answer by now. You know, number one, it's just that, you know, look, we're commanded not to live in despair, you know, and not to despair, and to think low of God's mercy and grace. And so I'm not, so, you know, being hopeful is just a part of my worldview. But number two, one of the things that gives me hope, I mean, we're in a faith space. One of the things that gives me hope is just the prayer that this work is accepted as a form of worship, basically. That my intention is that the work that I'm doing is service, and that God accepted as such. And that, you know, whenever my time is, whether it's today or tomorrow or 30 years from now, that I've lived a life well lived, and a life in service to God's creation, and that, you know, God is pleased with me because of that. And, you know, I'm grateful for the opportunity to build my life doing this type of work in service of my people. And so, you know, there's hope just in that gratitude.
Okay, I'll go, Reverend. I'll let you close us out. But as with what Mark said, I mean, for me, there is some theological grounding that I take very seriously, right? So there's a particular, not just merely short-term, but long-term, even eschatological view that I have that kind of grounds me, that doesn't give me over to despair when a kind of perhaps utopian vision is kind of, I'm like, this is not happening, right? For me, I have to ground myself in the things that I believe to be true, not just about what I see here and now, but what we will one day see, right? And that's important, right? And that's going to be different for different people. But again, part of this work, I'm often encouraging people to ground themselves in something that is stable, that extends beyond, right, the material, beyond the fleeting. You have to really think about what those values and those anchors are in this work, and it's important that you have them. In addition to that, right, I always see small evidences that I think bring you back in. I think when we are often at the margins of being like, okay, Friday's my last day, I mean it, I quit, right? Something happens between now and Friday where you're like, look at people being the best of themselves. I didn't think that was left, right? There are always those moments where I think, for me, people evidence that there is a kind of fundamental care and concern. They have the capacity to give of themselves beyond themselves for the good of others, for the good of their community. I want to tap into that, and I want to expand that, right? I want to exploit that in the best sense of the word, and see that aspect of our humanity further realized and celebrated. That gives me hope when I see it in those small ways, for the possibility of seeing them in even bigger ways.
Yeah, I often struggle just because I think hope is overused, but I am reminded of something in the Second Testament of Christian Bible, faith being the confidence in what we hope for, and the assurance about what we do not see, is found in Hebrews 11. And so again, it is my faith in that this is not how the Creator designed it. My faith in the power of those who believe in a better way, and in a place where all of us have what we need and are working daily to really bring that into being. If there is hope in anything, it is my hope in that. And it is my ability, along with those here and so many others, to see something different beyond that which is what is in front of us. The faith and hope that I believe that my enslaved ancestors had, in believing that their children would not always be in bondage. So that's where I'm hanging my hat on today.
I appreciate all of you so much for your time, for your dedication to this work, for your commitments to your own faith, and to you know, building a better America for all of us. So I want to thank you again. And just as we close, a reminder to folks who are joining us to keep in touch with Interfaith America's Black Interfaith Project and our Vote is Sacred project on our website. You can find upcoming virtual opportunities on our events page. We are looking forward to an event in conjunction with the Interfaith Center of New York in the month of June, which is Pride Month, and when we'll also be sort of celebrating Juneteenth. That is going to be a conversation about sort of the challenges and opportunities for faith communities to offer sort of inclusive space to LGBTQ folks of color. So we're really looking forward to that conversation. Again, there'll be more information on that on our events page in the coming weeks. And we encourage you all to just keep in touch. So thank you all so much for joining us. We appreciate it. And look for the recording and the brief survey in your inbox soon. Thanks, everyone. Take care.